The room was not meant for anything special that evening. It was just a small community space where people gathered after work, some to relax, some to pass time, and some simply because they had nowhere else to go. Chairs were placed without care, cups sat half-empty on tables, and voices mixed together in a low, constant noise. Laughter came easily there, often without much meaning behind it. It was the kind of place where moments passed quickly and were forgotten. Just as fast, in one corner of the room stood an old piano. Its surface was scratched, the polish worn thin by time. A few keys were slightly off color, and one of the pedals made a faint sound when pressed. Most people barely noticed it anymore. It had been there for years, part of the background like the walls and the lights. Sometimes children pressed random keys and ran away laughing. Sometimes someone tried to play a simple tune and stopped halfway through. Tonight it stood quiet, as if waiting. Among the people sitting around was a young man who rarely drew attention. He was not loud or confident, nor was he shy in an obvious way. He simply blended in. He was the kind of person others noticed only when he spoke too late or laughed a second after everyone else. He wasn't known for talent or skill. If people talked about him at all, it was usually in passing, often with a smile that suggested he wasn't to be taken seriously. No one ever thought of him as someone with depth. Certainly not someone with music inside him. He sat near the back, slightly apart from the others, his shoulders relaxed but his mind alert. He watched the room without staring, listening more than talking. There was a calmness about him that often went unnoticed. His eyes moved from face to face, then finally rested on the piano. It wasn't the first time he had looked at it. Every time he came here, his gaze found it without effort, and every time something pulled at him quietly. Something he never spoke about. He had learned long ago that some things were better kept to himself. Music was one of them. Someone nearby made a casual comment about the piano, half joking, half bored. Another voice followed, teasing, saying it was useless just sitting there. A few people laughed. Someone else added that it would be funny if someone played it badly, just to lighten the mood. The laughter grew a little louder. Then, without much thought, someone pointed toward him. "Why don't you try?" The voice said, not unkind, but clearly not expecting anything serious. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. It wasn't cruel laughter, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind that assumes nothing good will come next. A few people looked at him with playful curiosity, already imagining how awkward it might be. He smiled slightly. It was a small, controlled smile, the kind people often misunderstood. To them, it made him look like he was ready to do something silly. He shrugged as if to say it didn't matter. Inside, his chest felt tight, but his face gave nothing away. Slowly, he stood up. The movement alone caused whispers. Some people leaned forward. Others reached for their phones, ready to record what they assumed would be a harmless joke, something to share later with a caption and a laugh. No one expected to be moved. No one expected to be quiet. He walked toward the piano at an unhurried pace. Each step felt heavier than it looked. His heart beat faster, loud enough that he wondered if anyone could hear it. But his posture stayed calm. To everyone watching, it looked like confidence. No one could see what was happening inside him. He reached the piano and paused for a moment, looking at it as if greeting an old friend. He sat down on the bench. It creaked slightly under his weight, a sound that drew another small laugh from the back of the room. He adjusted his position, placed his hands on his knees, and took a slow breath. The air felt different here, closer, quieter. His fingers hovered above the keys. For a brief second, he didn't move. Someone chuckled, thinking the pause was part of the act. Another whispered something that caused a few more laughs. The room was ready for embarrassment, not beauty. Then he pressed the first key. The sound was soft. Almost too soft. It slipped into the noise of the room without demanding attention. A few people laughed again, relieved. This was exactly what they expected. He played another note, then another, slowly, carefully. His fingers moved with hesitation, as if he was testing the ground before taking a step. To the room it sounded unsure. To him it felt familiar, like touching something he knew by heart. The laughter continued, though it was already losing its energy. Some people frowned, confused. This wasn't funny, but it wasn't impressive either. It was just quiet, almost awkward. As he played, his thoughts drifted away from the room. He remembered evenings spent alone in a small room at home, sitting near an old keyboard with missing keys. He remembered practicing when everyone else was asleep, keeping the volume low, repeating the same notes until his fingers felt stiff. He remembered learning songs by listening carefully, rewinding parts again and again, trusting his ears more than anything else. He remembered being told that music was a hobby, nothing more. That it was fine for fun, but not for life. He remembered nodding, agreeing, keeping his dreams small and hidden. Over time he learned how to laugh along, how to make jokes about himself before others could. Those memories didn't make him sad now. They made him steady. The melody began to change. It didn't change suddenly. There was no clear moment where everything became different. It simply grew. His fingers started moving with more confidence, guided by something deeper than thought. The notes began to connect, forming a shape, a feeling. The laughter faded, not all at once, but piece by piece. One person stopped mid-laugh. Another lowered their phone slightly. Conversations slowed. The room began to notice, even if they didn't yet understand why. He didn't look up. His eyes stayed on the keys, his shoulders loosening as the tension left them. The piano no longer felt like a stage. It felt like the one place where he could breathe fully. The music filled the space in a way no one expected. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. It carried a quiet sadness mixed with warmth, the kind of sound that reaches people without asking permission. A few people shifted in their seats, suddenly aware that something important was happening. Someone whispered, "Listen." More phones were lowered. The room grew quieter. Not silent, but attentive. The kind of quiet that feels heavy and light at the same time. He continued playing, each note placed with care. It was no longer about showing anything. It never had been. This was how he spoke when words felt too small. This was how he released years of being overlooked, years of feeling invisible. A woman near the front felt her eyes sting, though she couldn't explain why. A man near the wall straightened, his arms slowly dropping to his sides. No one laughed now. No one smiled for the wrong reason. The piano, once ignored, now held the room completely. He added more depth to the melody, letting it rise and fall naturally. His hands moved faster, then slower, following a rhythm shaped by feeling rather than rules. It felt like telling a story without language. A story about waiting, about being patient, about finding a voice in silence. The sounds seemed to linger in the air, touching corners of the room that had felt empty before. People forgot about time. They forgot why they were there. All that mattered was the music. He wasn't finished yet, but something had already changed. For the first time since he sat down, he felt seen. Not through applause or words, but through stillness. Through attention. Through the absence of laughter, and still he played on, unaware that this was only the beginning of what the night would become. The room stayed quiet as his fingers continued to move across the keys. It was not the kind of silence that feels awkward or forced. It was the kind of silence that feels chosen. As if every person there had silently agreed that this moment mattered. Even the smallest sounds seemed to fade away. The low hum of the lights, the faint noise from outside, the shuffle of feet, all of it felt distant now. Pushed aside by the steady flow of music, the melody grew stronger, not louder, but clearer. Each note felt like it belonged exactly where it was. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt accidental. It was as if the piano had been waiting patiently for someone to speak through it this way. His hands moved with ease now, guided by feeling instead of thought. He was no longer thinking about who was watching or what they might say. He was simply playing. People in the room began to feel something change inside them. Some leaned forward slightly, not even realizing they had done so. Others sat perfectly still, afraid that even a small movement might break the moment. The music did not ask for attention, yet it held everyone completely. It did not try to impress, yet it left a deep mark. For him, the world around him had disappeared. The faces, the chairs, the walls, none of it mattered anymore. There was only the piano and the sound flowing through him. His breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the melody. His shoulders, once tense, relaxed fully. For the first time that evening, he felt completely present, completely honest. As he played, memories returned softly. Not as sharp pictures, but as feelings. He remembered long nights spent alone, sitting quietly with music playing through worn headphones. He remembered how music had been his escape when words felt useless. He remembered moments when he felt invisible, when laughter followed him for reasons he never understood. Music had always been there, waiting for him without judgment. The melody shifted again, becoming deeper and more emotional. It carried a quiet pain, but also a sense of strength. It spoke of struggle without anger, of loneliness without bitterness. A few people felt tears rise in their eyes and were surprised by it. They had not expected to feel anything tonight. Yet here they were, moved by someone they had almost laughed away. A person near the front pressed their lips together, trying to keep control. Another closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Someone near the back slowly lowered their head, as if listening more closely might help them understand something they had been avoiding. The room was no longer filled with thoughts or judgments. It was filled with feeling. He leaned slightly closer to the piano, as if listening to it as much as playing it. His fingers moved faster for a moment, then slowed again, following a rhythm shaped by emotion rather than rules. The sound rose gently, then fell back, like waves touching the shore and pulling away again. It felt like a conversation between his past and his present, between who he was and who he was becoming. The music told a story without words. A story about being overlooked, about being underestimated, about carrying something valuable inside while the world looked elsewhere. Everyone heard something different, but everyone understood something real. As the melody softened, the space between the notes became just as important as the notes themselves. The pauses allowed the sound to breathe. Each pause felt like a moment to reflect, to feel. The room stayed completely still, as if afraid to interrupt. Then came the final notes. They were gentle and slow, placed carefully, like the last steps of a long journey. His fingers lifted from the keys slowly, almost unwilling to let go. The sound faded naturally, leaving behind a silence that felt warm. Not empty. No one moved. For several long seconds, the room remained frozen. No applause. No whispers. Just stillness. He sat there, hands resting loosely in his lap. His heart beat quickly, but not from fear. It was a calm, steady feeling, like something heavy had been lifted. He stared at the keys, afraid that if he looked up, the moment might break apart. Then one person clapped. It was not loud or sudden. It was slow and thoughtful. A single clap, steady and sure. Another person joined in. Then another. Soon the room filled with applause. Not the wild kind, not the kind meant to impress, but the kind that comes from genuine respect. He finally looked up. What he saw surprised him deeply. People were standing. Some were smiling softly. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply nodded, as if acknowledging something important they could not put into words. The same faces that had laughed earlier now looked different. There was no mockery, no doubt. Only understanding. He stood up slowly, unsure of what to do next. His legs felt slightly weak, but his chest felt full. The applause continued, steady and warm. Someone near the front spoke quietly but clearly. That was beautiful. He nodded once. He did not trust himself to speak. Words felt too small, too fragile for what he was feeling. He stepped away from the piano and took a small step back, giving it one last glance, almost like a silent thank you. The applause slowly faded into soft murmurs. People began to talk again, but their voices were different now, softer, more thoughtful. A few people walked toward him. Not all at once. One by one person told him the music reminded them of a time they had nearly forgotten. Another said they had never felt that kind of emotion from a piano before. Someone else admitted they had expected a joke and felt ashamed for it. No one said much. They didn't need to. He listened quietly. He smiled when he could. He did not explain how long he had practiced or how much music meant to him. He did not talk about being laughed at. There was no need. The music had already spoken. As the room slowly returned to movement, something remained different. Chairs were moved gently. Cups were picked up carefully. Conversations resumed, but with less noise. The space felt calmer, more connected. He walked back toward the seat where he had been sitting earlier. The path felt different now. People made space for him without realizing it. A few nodded as he passed. No one laughed. No one whispered. He sat down and took a deep breath. His hands rested on his knees. His fingers still felt warm, as if the piano had left something behind in them. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting everything settle. He stayed there for a long time, watching the room slowly empty. The piano stood quietly in its corner again, but it no longer felt forgotten. It felt respected. It felt alive. As people began to leave, a few paused near the door. Some looked back at the piano. Some looked at him. One person stopped and said, "You should play more." Not as advice. As a simple truth, he smiled. This time, the smile came easily. When the room finally emptied, he stood up to leave. The lights felt softer now, less harsh. The air felt lighter. He walked slowly past the piano and gently placed his hand on its edge for a brief moment. The surface was cool, familiar. No one was there to see it. The moment belonged only to him. Outside, the night air felt fresh against his face. The sounds of the street returned, distant traffic, footsteps, quiet voices. Life moved on as it always did. He walked slowly, letting the night settle around him. That night did not change his life in an obvious way. He did not become famous. No one offered him opportunities or promised him anything. He went home the same way he always did. He entered the same room. He lived the same routine, but something inside him had changed. For the first time, he truly believed that his voice mattered, even if it was quiet, even if it came through music instead of words. He understood now that laughter did not always mean the end of a story. Sometimes it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, people remembered that night in different ways. Some talked about it briefly and moved on. Some thought about it when they were alone. Some found themselves listening to music more carefully, noticing details they had ignored before. A few returned to that place. Hoping to hear the piano again, he returned too. Sometimes he played when the room was nearly empty, letting the sound fill the space softly. Sometimes he played when people were around, keeping his head down, focused only on the keys. He did not announce himself. He did not seek attention. He played because music was part of who he was, whether anyone listened or not. And when people did listen, they listened differently now. The laughter that once filled the room never returned in the same way. It became gentler, kinder, more aware. He had not changed the world. He had not proven anything to anyone. But he had changed a moment. He had changed the way a room felt. And sometimes that is enough. The piano remained in its corner, worn and imperfect, just like before. But it was no longer invisible, and neither was he.